Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Molly, and for this episode, I'd like to welcome Emmanuel Gobelin. Described as the first leadership guru for the digital generation and the freshest voice in leadership today, Emmanuel has advised organisations across the globe on developing leaders, establishing teams, and changing cultures. He is the author and co-author of 7 UK and US best-selling books, the latest of which, This Is Not a Leadership Book, has sealed his place as one of the world's foremost management thinkers. For over 20 years, his work has been based on his mantra, "There must be a better way and together we can find it." A French national, Emmanuel moved to the UK in 1985. He holds an international baccalaureate from the United World College of the Atlantic, an MA from the University of St Andrews, and a diploma in management science from the Nottingham Trent University. Thank you so much for joining us. So to begin, if it's okay, I'd like to ask you some quick-fire questions just so our listeners can get to know you a bit better.
Sure.
What was the last book that you read?
Honestly, mine. No, it's true.
I don't think a lot of people can say that.
The last book I read was The Connected Leader, which was actually the first book I wrote, but I've just been asked to do a second edition. So that's the very latest book I read. And before that, I think it probably would have been the latest Jack Reacher.
Oh,
Sorry.
you're a fan of those.
They're good for planes.
Oh, yeah, very airport book, aren't they? What is the last thing that you learned?
That the world is a frightening place. Just looking around at everything that's going on, but also that actually it's good to vote, because I've just been voting in the French elections, because I don't get to vote here, even though I've lived here for 40 odd years, but I still vote in the French elections. So it's kind of, the results might not always be the ones that we want, but actually the going to vote is always a nice thing.
Yeah. What is your greatest strength?
Gosh, and that's supposed to be quick fire as well.
This one does usually stump people because they haven't always thought of their own strengths.
I was going to say communication, which is quite ironic given how stopped I am. I not taking myself too seriously, I think is probably my greatest strength. Yeah.
What motivates you?
The same thing that has motivated me since I was probably about 13. I just want to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And just, not in a kind of revolutionary way, but just, I said, I think probably in my 30s, I realized that actually if you want to make the world a better place, it starts with your street. So I just want to make where I live better. That's what motivates me.
And what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, I'll tell you what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a petrol pump attendant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was my dream, because I loved the smell of petrol when I was a kid.
Me too. I still like it. Yeah.
No, I still do. So that's what I wanted to be when I grew up, which is a good job I didn't get into that job because they're just not anymore. No, cabinet maker. That's what my mum wanted me to be. My mum wanted me to be a cabinet maker or a baker. And baker wouldn't be good for me because I would eat the stock. But cabinet maker, I just love furniture making. I think that would be something I would really love to get into. I love old furniture.
Wow. Well, I guess you could still. It's not too late to get into something like that.
Not too late. I think my wife might disagree with me, but I think it's not too late.
Thank you for answering those. It's really interesting to know a bit more about you. I do have a few more, but I'll come back to them at the end. So the theme for today's episode is uncertainty, which is a very common theme in leadership development space right now. In your opinion, what qualities do you believe are essential for leaders to possess when facing uncertain times?
I thought about this a while back during COVID, because I was being asked a lot about what do we do. I think one of my clients described it as being back to navigating by the stars. And I thought about uncertainty a lot, and Catherine, my wife and co-author and business partner, and I did some work on it. I think there's 3 things in uncertainty that you need to do, and each of those carry, attributes for leaders. I think the first, and we call them ABC just to make it easy to remember. The first one is appreciate. And I think it's about appreciating where people are at. So what might be uncertain for you may not be uncertain for others, and vice versa. You may think there's no uncertainty, but other people around you may experience it. So you have to appreciate where they're at, and that's all about compassion. I prefer compassion to empathy because compassion is active.
Yeah.
So it's about I get you, I understand where you're at, and then I'm going to do something about it. So that's something which is very important. Are you able to understand and put yourself in the shoes of other people and understand what's going on, what their reality looks like as opposed to yours? So that's about appreciating where people are at. After that, you need to broadcast. And I use broadcast rather than communicate because I don't think it's a two-way process. I think you need to disclose. You need to disclose the information you have. If you remember during COVID, people were desperate for information and they wanted to hear that there was a plan, that this is why we were doing and so on. So I think there's a lot of broadcast that needs to go on. And then there is communication, but that's the C for co-create, because then you need to be able to get people around the table and create the future with them rather than impose it on them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're removing uncertainty with a kind of forced plan, which doesn't help either. So appreciate where they're at. This is about compassion. This is your ability to relate to them and them relating to you. Broadcast, which is about your fundamental communication skills, which we don't speak enough of and don't do enough on. And then the C for co-create, which is about your ability to, collaborate, your ability to cooperate with people, your ability to seek advice from people. So that would, for me, would be the three areas where skills matter, and attributes matter.
So thinking about the B, the kind of broadcast, the communicating, what roles do honesty and transparency play in leading in uncertain times? And how can leaders be honest and transparent without causing unnecessary alarm?
It's such a good question because I think I think that speaks about the biggest danger embedded into any type of leadership development or leadership training. I had an uncle when I was little, and he was incredibly political. Every time we got into a conversation and I had something to say, he would always say, "It's just not as simple as that."
Really?
And I think the trouble is we're trying to find tips and techniques. And so we say, well, you've got to be honest. But actually, it's not as simple as that because you don't want to create, as you rightly say, you don't want to create panic. You don't want. So I think for me, it's about you should never lie. You should always think about the environment you create. So, for example, your role as a leader is to carry an umbrella over your team. Now, that doesn't mean that you said to them, it's not raining, because otherwise it would be weird to have an umbrella if it's not raining. It doesn't mean that you just shut the umbrella and let it rain on them and say, hey, welcome to my world. It's about how do I use the knowledge that I have and express it in a way that resonates for the people who are listening to me? And how do I hear what they have to say in a way that challenges my idea? So I think if you have honesty of intent, then actually it's about using the techniques, using your abilities to communicate in a way they understand, but you can't change the message.
Yeah.
You can't just lie your way out of stuff. And it's really, really difficult. There is a gentleman called Fons Trompenaar, and Fons is a kind of culture guru. He's a Dutch guy. And Fons wrote a book called Riding the Waves of Culture, in which he says, one of the challenges for leaders is always to manage to reconcile opposite ideas, and it's this idea, and actually Martin, who is another writer, also expresses that in his book, The Opposable Mind, which is, as a leader, you have to be able to have two fundamentally opposite ideas in your head and manage to reconcile them in something that makes sense with the help of others. And I think that's the challenge of, yes, on the one hand, you want honesty, but on the other hand, you don't want to panic people. On the one hand, and you've got this, what Fons call proposition, on the one hand, on the other hand, and you constantly have that. So I think that, in a way, as long as you remember that nothing is as simple as that, then you probably start to have the right level of inquiry in your head to do the right thing. And I guess, it's the challenge of leadership, which is it's kind of all about you, but it's really not about you. It's about the people who follow you. So you have to constantly remember, how do I project myself? but who am I projecting myself to?
Yeah.
So kind of bring people into your thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes into my next question really well, which was about what role does emotional intelligence play in leading through uncertainty, and how can leaders improve or develop that skill?
It's so years ago in a previous life, I used to work for a consultancy. I did some work with Daniel Goleman, who wrote the first kind of popularized the notion of emotional intelligence. And I remember Daniel coming over from the US, and he was giving a speech in Paris. And they said, well, Emmanuel, you speak French, you go with X, and help him out. And he was supposed to give a speech in a university in France. And the guy he was giving the speech for, the kind of head of the university, said, well, this emotional intelligence thing doesn't make any sense, because you're either intelligent and you have emotions, but the two never connect. It's a very French view of life. And so he said, we can't call this thing emotional intelligence because nobody would ever understand it. We're going to call it managing emotions intelligently. And I thought, well, actually, even though it came from a weird French place, it makes a lot of sense to me, because I think emotional intelligence is such a broad term and people get more worried, have it, don't have it, what is it? But I think it's all about, look, we all have emotions, but do we know how our emotions are impacting other people? And if we talk, this idea of turbulence, of uncertainty, it is all about me being able to not be hijacked by my biases as a leader. And it's all about me thinking, okay, what do I feel? What do I want to transmit? How do I want to be seen? How am I really inside? What's my truth? What's their truth? So round that long sort of answer to say, I think emotional intelligence is critical. I think we're, just from the go, I said compassion. Well, if you think about compassion, that's about really putting myself in somebody's shoes. It's about me having a social awareness, knowing what's going on, me having enough self-awareness to know, do they feel insecure? Do they feel it's turbulent? Do I feel insecure? So I think it's pretty critical. But I think the key to it is to understand that actually the way to develop it is to think about, it's not about changing your emotions. It's not about less emotions, which I think a lot of people worry about, especially French people. We think, well, hang on a minute, we are emotional for this. We should be able to express ours. But it's about understanding the impact your emotions have on other people and learning to manage that. So it is critical. It is hard to develop, but relatively simple to understand how to develop it, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah, no, it does.
That's the second question I finished with, if that makes sense. The second answer, and I finished with that makes sense.
So being a distinguished author, I'm sure you have a lot.
But just
what advice would you give to emerging leaders who are stepping into roles during periods of significant uncertainty? And do you have any resources you can recommend to people who want to learn more?
So my advice is the same for, irrespective actually of the environment within which you work. And it's not mine. It comes from a book which I encourage anybody to read. So that's the resource, which is called Why Should Anybody Be Led by You by Goffey. And I think he has possibly expressed leadership development in the best one-liner, which is be yourself more with skill. And I think for me, you can apply that to any environment you find yourself in. So don't try to be the copy of somebody else, because it'll never work. You'll be phony and slightly weird. And actually, most of the kind of leadership heroes are weird anyway, so why would you want to be the Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or whomever your star is? No, be yourself. Be more yourself. So don't be frightened to share who you are with people, just to be you, because it's kind of okay to be you. As long as it's the most skillful version of you. And I think that, again, back to your point about emotional intelligence, that's really about understanding, actually, this bit of me can frighten people or is a bit aloof or whatever. How do I become a more skillful version of me? Rather than say, well, okay, I've got to get rid of this. Because you are you, and that's good. So I think be yourself more with skill is the advice I would give to anybody. And actually not just emerging leaders, just any leaders. And it's hard because if you Organizations of any kind are really weird because then it's not followers who choose leaders, it's other leaders who decide you're going to lead.
Yeah.
So as a result, you're kind of in this weird place where you try to fit in because you want to be spotted. So you deliver a lot of stuff. And then eventually, in order to fit in, you kind of stop having opinions until you realize that in order to be promoted to the leadership staff, you need to have opinions.
Yeah.
And you don't quite remember how to have those. And then you think, well, are they really valid? So it's a real challenge. It's really difficult. But just, it's okay to be you. Just be more of you. Understand what the best version of you looks like and just project that one. And you know, as long as you are open to feedback, open to, and surround yourself with people who can give you honest feedback, then I think you can't go far wrong.
That's brilliant advice. Thank you so much for your stories and ideas and advice. Just before we end, I'd like to ask you a few more quick fire questions.
Go
okay. Do you or have you ever played a musical instrument?
Yes, the guitar. I played the guitar, not very well, enough to learn enough chords to write songs. So that was my thing. So my grandma bought me a guitar. My grandma had this fantastic habit. Sorry, I go off on a tangent all the time. My grandma had this fantastic habit, which was to buy us the exact same gift for all the grandchildren. So at age 10, we all got a guitar. And so whenever you turned 10, you knew you were going to get a guitar. So we all got a guitar, but I played mine, unlike my sister who gave up. So I wrote songs and stuff. So the guitar is the only instrument. Yeah.
And do you still play it?
Very bad. To the great annoyance of anybody who lives nearby.
What is your favorite type of food?
Food. French food. It's got to be.
I feel it's slightly biased.
I know my nephew. My nephew came on a school exchange to the UK, and on his way back, he came through London. So I said, "Well, look, stay with us," And because he'd been a student, I said, "Look, let's go out, and it's London. You choose, and Indian food, Chinese food, Asian, whatever you want." And he just looked at me and said, "Well, what is wrong with?" He spoke to me in French, not with a French accent. He said, "And what is so wrong about French food?" I don't think we can do better than French food when we're French.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's got to be.
Do you think you've had good French food here, or does it just not compare?
Now, yes. So I moved to the UK. I moved to Wales in 1985. I came to school here, to Atlantic College in Llantwit Major. And at the time, you couldn't really get French food here. You could get food. You couldn't get French food. So my auntie used to send it to me in parcels like charcuterie and all sorts.
Oh, amazing.
I mean, now you can find exactly the same thing. I would argue, and please do not put this online anywhere where French people can access it. But I would argue you can probably get in the kind of top food, it's just abstract.
In the good,
You can probably get better French food in London than you can in Paris.
That's an exclusive. That's going to be the title of this episode.
Not everyday food, but in terms of, I think the food scene in the UK is much more inventive than France. France is a bit stuck. In fact, there was an article. I think it was in the Times where French restaurants were sending young chefs over to the UK to train. No, I think there was a thing like that. There you go.
What is your favorite noise?
Favorite noise? Children laughing. 100%. You just watch a video online of a kid laughing and you just smile.
And you'll be laughing.
You'll be laughing.
Yeah.
You just can't help it.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
It depends. If I'm writing, I'll be a night owl because I like to write in the evening or when it's quiet. And so most of the time I do get up quite early.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, it depends.
So
Both. Yeah.
And lastly, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Wow. Is there like a dieting superpower that one can get? Does that exist?
I guess you could shapeshift and then it wouldn't really matter, would it?
Yeah, that would be quite cool. No, I tell you, I would like to be I just would like to be invisible. I would like to be able to be in places and just see the world for what it is. I mean, they say, they said the king thinks the country smells of fresh paint because everywhere he's been, everything is just repainted. And a lot of the time, when you do what I do and you go in and you do something and you do a workshop or you do a speech or whatever, you never quite know what happens afterwards. And people are always kind, so they'll never tell you, "Oh, this thing, that was terrible," or whatever. Because they don't, because people are by and large kind. So, the ability to be invisible and just see what happens, what the impact you've had or how your ideas have developed. That
was a good one. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the experience.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Mae un podlediad sgyrsiau ar arweinyddiaeth ar gael trwy ein gwefan. Mae'r hawlfraint y podlediad yma yn cael ei gadw gan Llywodraeth Cymru. Our Conversations on Leadership podcast is available through our website. Copyright of this podcast is held by the Welsh Government.